B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Thursday, September 19th, 2019. That's 9/19/19. You like the way those numbers line up? Well, last night I was reading some news on my computer and watching a delayed taping of Rachel Maddow's show when I got this double-barreled breaking news. Based on anonymous sources described as former intelligence officials, the Washington Post is reporting that somebody was listening in on presidential phone calls, and they monitored Trump in a conversation with an unnamed foreign leader, which NBC believes is Vladimir Putin. And in that conversation, the person monitoring it was so uncomfortable with what she or he heard, a promise to that foreign leader regarded as so troubling that it led to a formal whistleblower complaint with the Inspector General for the intelligence community. Now, you've heard this because it's a controversy that's been growing over the last week or so. Once that whistleblower complaint was received, the Inspector General evaluated it, found it credible and of urgent concern. That's legal language. And the rule of law is that within 7 days of receipt of such a complaint found to be valid, that the Director of National Intelligence should forward that information, the whistleblower information, to the so-called Gang of Eight. That's the 4 leaders of the House and the 4 leaders of the Senate, and the respective intelligence communities. But Joseph McGuire, who is among many acting officials in Trump's cabinet universe, he's in a real legal pickle because it's apparent that the White House has instructed him not to share this information. They have hinted that it could be privileged. That was how we were tipped off that it probably involved the president. So, fair enough. Like anybody, I'm curious about this controversy that has been launched. And like many people who identify as left of center like I do, I really, really, really want to see some smoking gun that could lead to the removal of Trump and the end of the whole Trump juggernaut. But once again, I follow facts, I follow instincts, and I listen to my bullshit detector, which I paid big bucks for when Radio Shack was still in business. Now, this latest torpedo, or sortie, also wraps into last week's unproven claims that Trump's careless handling of secrets led the intelligence community to extract this so-called agent, the mole in the Kremlin. And that story fell apart in short order. But it is now used again to buttress this that, Trump is a loose-lipped kind of guy. Now, he is. I am not rejecting or denying that in any way. But we do not yet know the contents of the intercepted conversation, what alarmed the individuals to create this whistleblower complaint. And Trump tweeted today what appears to be a pretty rational response. He said, virtually any time I speak on the phone to a foreign leader, I understand that there may be many people listening from various U.S. agencies, not to mention those from the other country itself. Knowing all of this, is anybody dumb enough to believe that I would say something inappropriate with a foreign leader while on such a potentially heavily populated call? I would only do what is right anyway and only do good for the USA. Well, Trump lies so reflexively that this could just be a really good practiced line of deception. But after seeing Mike Flynn exposed for intercepted phone calls with the Russian ambassador, Trump would be a total idiot not to know that a call with Putin or anybody else is being monitored. And so, for me, my initial reaction here is that absent the evidence of some sort of sordid, people have already used the word treason, some sort of a promise that Trump made to Putin or anybody else that obviously compromises U.S. policy or U.S. security, this appears to be another effort to take out Trump using the levers of the national security and intelligence communities. So we go to the New York Times. Their report on Michael Atkinson, the Inspector General. He made a trip to Capitol Hill today. It was behind closed doors with the House Intelligence Committee. And, of course, there are leaks from committee members that tell us that he wouldn't discuss anything related to the details of the whistleblower complaint or its underlying intercepted intelligence. So he really just talked about process and whether or not the Director of National Intelligence is compelled to forward this information to the congressional committees. So, given the obstruction of this administration, it's understandable that many people will just fall in line and say, okay, well, gosh, you know, Washington Post says this is true. They got 2 former intelligence officials. So I made a quick call today to Bill Binney, former technical director of the National Security Agency. And Bill has publicly acknowledged that he voted for Trump. But I don't think that colors his knowledge of our technical capabilities. Here's what Bill Binney had to say.
Well, I mean, that's what I've been saying from the very beginning. They've been monitoring, President Trump, candidate Trump, and even before that they were monitoring him. So, but, I mean, they've been monitoring presidents and so on all along, and everybody in Washington of any significance. That's why the complaint, for example, in the Roger Stone case or in the General Flynn case, where they're talking about the conversations with the Russian ambassador, they already have all that crap, you know. Right. So all they have to do is subpoena it, which they're doing, and it's going to show exculpatory stuff. So that's what they were hiding, and that's why they didn't want that known. And NSA has all that data anyway. They always have. Even Russ Tice was saying that back in 2003 and 2004.
Yes,
when NSA was spying on all anybody who had any authority over them, like members of the federal judges, members of the Supreme Court, members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the House, the Senate, everybody.
Yes. As
well as, the president and anybody of any significance anywhere, bankers and so on, So, yeah, that was back then, and now, of course, it's much worse because they're just taking in everything on everybody.
Now, Bill, if we see the way the narrative is being played in the corporate media, they're tying last week's attack on Trump, the so-called Moscow Mole story, where they claim that it was his loose handling of intelligence that led them to extract this Russian agent from Russia. And as the reporting has revealed, this was not a guy who was high-ranking. And the whole story is just stinky from beginning to end. And he is alive and well, living in a $1 million mansion outside Washington, D.C., so it makes it pretty hard to think that the Kremlin believes that they were duped. And in fact, I offer the scenario that this shows that it's likely that John Brennan and James Clapper were duped by the guy they thought was this high-ranking mole in the Kremlin.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Peter. I mean, but again, all of this should be known by NSA and CIA. I mean, when I was talking to Director Pompeo when he was director of CIA. I said, you know, you're not getting the truth from your people here, and you're not getting the truth from any of the other IC agencies. So, and that's also true of the president. So, I mean, this is just another example of this phone call. Just another example of the kinds of things that they have available to them and what they can do with them. Well, I looked at it this way. Okay, the president's talking to another foreign head of state, and they're talking foreign policy probably, and that happens to be the charter of the President of the United States. So in my mind, no matter what he said, he is one orchestrating our policy. It's his policy. And, you know, any agreements he makes has to be approved by the Senate, but he's the one who negotiates the agreements, as well as the Secretary of State, you know. And once they do that, then they come up with an agreement, and then they submit it to the Senate for ratification. That's the process. So I don't see anything outside the process here anyway.
Now, when you heard that this Washington Post revelation is based on two former intelligence officials, did any names immediately spring to mind, Bill?
Clapper and Brennan. Yes.
I had the exact same reaction. And, of course...
I would have said, though, you know, Hayden might have done it, except, you know, he had a stroke, so he was kind of out of it. So
I see.
You know,
but
could have been three of them.
But first of all, using former officials to talk about a current whistleblowing process strikes me as bullshit.
Or the other version would be horseshit. You know, one is round and the other's flat, you know.
That's Bill Binney, the former NSA technical director. And I offer that as a counterpoint, a little antidote to what you're going to hear and read in the corporate media, which sets this up as another rationale to eject Trump. And then you have these congressional committees that are fumbling the impeachment process when they've got a clear case, the Michael Cohen plea deal. Trump is impeachable, but the Democrats are afraid of it. I also want to note that NBC used unrelated information and tied it to the Washington Post report of this intercepted phone call to try to kind of set the hook, if you will. So this is under the byline of Steve Bannon at MSNBC.com at the Rachel Maddow blog. And he reports that while Trump was stinking up California, he came to San Francisco. Well, actually, he came to the Bay Area. He didn't set foot in the city of St. Francis. He was in Southern California. He went to a border wall site. And while he was there, he was speaking in front of cameras rolling and talking about his wall. In fact, this is just replacement barrier for something that used to be there. So Trump has a head of the Army Corps of Engineers there. And he says, you know, one thing we haven't mentioned is technology. These segments of wall are wired so that we will know if somebody's trying to break through. So then he handed it off to General Todd Semonite, acting head of the Army Corps of Engineers, who said, sir, there could be some merit in not discussing that. But Trump he didn't get it, I guess. Then he said fortifying the wall even more was the fact that the steel wall's beams are heat conductors. It's designed to absorb heat, so it's extremely hot. You won't be able to touch it. You can fry an egg on that wall. And apparently the general squirmed and mentioned again that perhaps we don't want to blab about that. So this is a bad behavior on Trump's part. It's stupid. He can't help himself because he is so compulsive. And he's trying to show his base that he's actually building the wall and hopes they forget that Mexico was going to pay for it. But they use this incident and try to link it to the new information coming out from the Washington Post. And then they tie it to last week's leaks about the mole in the Kremlin. This is not journalism. This is not honest reporting. And while I do want to see an end to Trump in all ways, shapes, and forms, if it comes through dirty deeds of the intelligence community, the deep state, what will we have gained? I want to thank Linda Lewis, who has been following the prosecution of Daniel Hale. He used to work at the NSA, then at the National Geospatial Agency, and he leaked a lot of information to Jeremy Scahill at The Intercept. And he is now on trial for that leaking. And the nature of his leak was about the drone wars. He was a specialist who selected targets for review by superiors. And he has grave concerns about the number of innocent civilians who've been killed by our drone strikes. So in this case, the government has filed a motion to exclude evidence, argument, or comment at trial. And basically, they are denying him any defense for his motivation in leaking to The Intercept. Number one, the prosecutors want to exclude any commentary about good motives of the defendant, any claim that an alternative perpetrator committed the charged crimes, a claim that everybody leaks classified information, like Clapper and Brennan, as I surmise with Bill Binney. We think alike in that way. And so this is an example of what Julian Assange would face if he ever does come to the U.S. for trial. They will exclude anything except the bare facts. That's how draconian the Espionage Act and similar, legal standards are applied. And that drone war that Dan Hale was so troubled by, yesterday it took out 30 pine nut harvesters in Afghanistan. They had just finished working in the pine nut fields. I don't know exactly. I guess they pull them off trees. And I love pine nuts, by the way. I've just never harvested them myself. Anyway, they were finishing up their workday. They lit a bonfire. They were sitting together when a drone targeted them. 30 killed, 40 wounded. That is the collateral damage from our drone wars. But can't be used as evidence by Dan Hale to defend himself in his federal trial for leaking. And it's been a bloody week or 10 days in Afghanistan. 20 people died in a suicide truck bomb attack Thursday, today, carried out in the southern province of Zabul. Hundreds of civilians have been killed in fighting across Afghanistan since the collapse of U.S. Taliban peace talks. It's probably not going to get any better. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great people like Carla Mahoney, Ben Brotman, Patrick Garay, and Andrew Harnack just canceled his subscription. I'm not singling you out, Andrew. I thank you for your support over the years, and I mention that so that someone else might say, I could chip in $5 a month and replace Andrew's contribution. If that's you, follow these simple instructions. Go to peterbcollins.com. Find the menu tab and click on it. Find Become a Subscriber and click on it. You'll land on the sign-up page. Identify a level of support you're comfortable with and click on it. You'll set up a PayPal subscription that will send me $5 a month, or 10 or 20 if you choose. And if you don't like PayPal, yo comprendo, you can communicate with my post office box, number 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. And yes, for new annual subscribers, I do have bonus books, 2100, A Dystopian Utopia, and Trump on the Couch. The other day I spoke with Pepe Escobar. You've seen the 2 installments that have been posted over the last couple of days, and perhaps you haven't had a chance to listen to either one. But in the first, Pepe Escobar had a lot of good commentary about the assault on the Saudi oil complex that has been claimed as the work of Yemen's Houthi rebels. And Pepe filed a great story that I've linked to at Asia Times, where he talks about the possible collaboration of Shiites in the eastern province working at the Saudi oil installations, and that while we're getting these full-throated claims from the United States and Saudi Arabia that it had to be Iran, that there's strong evidence that the Houthis exhibited a whole bunch of ballistic missiles, including the Quds-1 that is in evidence, according to the Saudis, a QUDS, a Quds-1 cruise missile. And the Houthis had those, and they showed them off in early July. Also, the same is true of the drones. A quote from Escobar: "Even more relevant is the fact that the massive American hardware deployed in Saudi Arabia, inside out and outside in, satellites, AWACS, Patriot missiles, drones, battleships, jet fighters, didn't see a thing, or certainly not in time. The sighting of 3 loitering drones by a Kuwaiti bird hunter, arguably heading toward Saudi Arabia, is being invoked as evidence. Cue to the embarrassing picture of a drone swarm, wherever it came from, flying undisturbed for hours over Saudi territory." And he notes just how vulnerable the oil facilities are in the Magic Kingdom. Saudi air defenses are not equipped to defend the country from Yemen, but from Iran. That's a Maginot Line, friends. Do you know what I'm referring to? When I was a kid, my dad took us to Europe. And he took us to the border of France and Germany, where after World War I, France built these gun embankments, the Maginot Line. But the gun turrets didn't swivel 360. And Hitler's Luftwaffe flew around them and bombed them from the back. And so the Saudis have created a Maginot Line where they don't have defenses against Yemen. They say, those pikers can never hurt us. And Pepe says that there's an interview with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps General Hajizadeh, and that he responded to questions that were forwarded by Pepe Escobar. And one of those questions was, what message is the Revolutionary Guards trying to convey? And Hajizadeh does not mince words. In addition to the U.S. bases in various regions like Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, Emirates, and Qatar, we have targeted all naval vessels up to a distance of 2,000 kilometers. We are constantly monitoring them. They think that if they go to a distance of 400 kilometers, they are out of our firing range. Wherever they are, it only takes one spark. We hit their vessels, their air bases, their troops. The New York Times, in a very interesting exercise of editing, ran a story with this headline: Iran's foreign minister vows all-out war if U.S. or Saudi strike. Opening paragraph: a military strike against Iran by the U.S. or Saudi would result in an all-out war, the Iranian foreign minister Mohammad Zarif said on Thursday, repeating his government's denial of responsibility on the Saudi oil facilities. But later in the article, they quote him more fully. In an interview with CNN Thursday, Zarif said, "This is agitation for war because it's based on lies. It's based on deception. I'm making a very serious statement that we don't want war. We don't want to engage in a military confrontation, but we won't blink to defend our territory." Can you reconcile that quote with the headline of all-out war? This is how the corporate media in this country uses yellow journalism to support the narratives of the government and the intelligence community. And they alternate those quotes from Zarif with Mike Pompeo saying that it was an act of war, that he is in the kingdom in an act of diplomacy, while the foreign minister of Iran is threatening all-out war. And now we turn to a great piece of Mint-Press News today under the byline of Medea Benjamin of Code Pink and Nicholas Davies. And they point out that the attack on the oil facilities is a distraction and a diversion. And they argue that it should, quote, lead to just the opposite response, urgent calls for an immediate end to the war in Yemen and an end to U.S. economic warfare against Iran. And they trot through the information we have so far. They cite, as Pepe Escobar did, that in July, The Houthis unveiled missiles and drones, including Quds-1, under a banner that read, "The coming period of surprises." I think this was a surprise. Like Pepe. They say it's plausible that some members of the Shia community inside the kingdom may have provided intelligence or logistical support. Japan's defense minister told reporters, "We believe the Houthis carried out the attack based on the statement claiming responsibility." So I think this is an interesting piece, and I commend Medea Benjamin. She wrote a book about the Saudi kingdom. I think we did an interview on that. And she is a tireless advocate for peace. Interesting and very diplomatic commentary at The Guardian today from Patrick Wintour, who is the diplomatic editor of The Guardian. And I'm usually skeptical of The Guardian when it comes to U.S. interventionism. They often cheer us on, particularly after they were brushed back after the Snowden revelations. Anyway, he writes, the Middle East finds itself in a strange position where what he describes as an undoubted crime, I see it as an act of war, has been committed. An apparent perpetrator has come forward providing elaborate supporting details of the weapon use, the motive, timing, but the victim refuses to believe the confessor and instead accuses a third party. And he basically concludes that we can't believe any of these jokers. Mike Pompeo, Mohammed bin Salman, and to some extent the Iranians. And I think that is fair. I was going to skip this story until I saw the news that Justin Trudeau, who faces the voters of Canada in 5 weeks, is now doing damage control as a third blackface episode emerges. So there have been 2 videos, one where he dressed up as Aladdin, and that was called Brownface. Then there's a picture of a video of Trudeau, his face, arms, and legs painted black, waving at a camera, sticking out his tongue. And he's, profoundly apologetic. I didn't think it was racist at the time, but now I see it was a racist thing to do. This is campaign malfeasance. He knew that stuff was out there, just like Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia. Stupid. People are stupid. Mitch McConnell, bristling at the Moscow Mitch sobriquet, has decided to kind of split the difference, and he's saying he's okay with an extra $250 million in election security money, but I smell a rat here because the House has approved $600 million, and his $250 million will lead to a conference committee and probably no action before the election. Hand-counted paper ballots. That is the most secure way for us to vote. Junk the machines, screw the need for a result on election night, and just let people vote without suppression techniques and photo ID and all that stuff. Disappointing news, the plea bargain from Standing Rock. Redfon Follis, a political prisoner, and that's an accurate description, who was arrested during the Standing Rock protests of the Dakota Access Pipeline, was sentenced today in federal court to 57 months. She'll serve about 3 years and 3 months, given credit for the time she's already been locked up. And as you probably know, she developed some sort of a love relationship, or at least a sexual relationship, with an undercover FBI agent who was there at Standing Rock. His name is Heath Harmon, and it was his gun that she is going to prison for possessing, and the gun went off during a skirmish. I've never been able to get to the bottom of exactly what happened there, but that is a miscarriage of justice. Yesterday on Facebook, my buddy John Kiriakou posted an article, and he said that Hunter Durensis, who wrote this piece, is a friend of his. And I'm sorry to say that I disagree with my friend Mr. Kiriakou. It is a criticism of Valerie Plame, who is running for a House seat in New Mexico. And I've already gone on record. I don't support her. I don't find her to be a credible person. The pay-for-play politics that she and her husband engaged in with Hillary Clinton, I found to be disgusting. But They are smearing Valerie Plame because she once retweeted an article by Phil Giraldi. And the article is critical of American Jews who support the extreme Zionism of the State of Israel and lead us into war time after time. It was a risky piece by Giraldi. I don't agree with all of the language that he uses, and in my interview with Phil, I got him to walk back one of his more inflammatory elements, which was when Jewish Americans appear on TV, there should be some disclaimer in the lower third. But fundamentally, he was courageous in reporting what is true. And now this is being used to try to claim that Valerie Plame shouldn't run for Congress because she's anti-Semitic. Like I said, a lot of criticisms of Valerie Plame, but this is an unfair smear. And finally, here in California, we are relieved that Trump's 2.5-day visit is behind us. But the stench remains. And one of the things while he was here, he did not visit San Francisco, but he criticized our city for a long-term homeless problem. We admit it. It's true. But in his commentary, he viewed homeless people not as human beings, but as a detriment to property owners. He said when they set up their tents outside buildings that it diminishes the value of those buildings. He doesn't have any interest in addressing the causes of homelessness or the plight of the individuals who live in those tents that bring down the value of his rich buddy's properties. But as if that were not insulting enough, there is a new assault. On the way back to Washington, Trump told a pool reporter on Air Force One Wednesday night that he is going to have the EPA send violation notices to San Francisco because, he says, we are allowing syringes, needles, and other waste to flow into the Pacific Ocean through our sewer system. Now, this is flatly untrue, and this is where I wish the voters had gone ahead and renamed one of the 2 San Francisco sewage treatment plants after George W. Bush. It was a ballot initiative that failed a couple of years ago. But Trump is just making this up. Now, let me be clear. We have a problem with drug users who do discard their used needles on the street. I have tiptoed through the Tenderloin several times and encountered that. But they don't flow into the ocean. Even if they went down a drain, we have what are called filters, Donnie. And pushback from Mayor London Breed here. She said Trump's assertions are ridiculous. No debris flow out into the bay or the ocean. If the president wants to talk about homelessness, we are committed to working with our state and federal partners on actual solutions. Jennifer Friedenbach, head of the San Francisco Coalition on Homelessness. Trump, he is literally the one person who could single-handedly address this crisis. He could restore the massive cuts to HUD funding made decades ago, instead of making massive investments in the military, for instance. Instead, he is throwing blame in every direction, not taking responsibility for a crisis that lays squarely on his shoulders. It's in his classic toddler fashion. And I want to say farewell to Sander Van Oker. He was an old-school gentleman and journalist who worked for NBC and ABC, also on the public television system. And I didn't know him well. I met him a couple of times. He was a good friend of my brother, Roby, who worked with him at ABC television. Sandy Van Oker passed away on Monday near Santa Barbara at the age of 91. He was one of the panelists who quizzed both John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in the pivotal 1960 presidential debates. Thank you, Sandy. And thank you for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Please share it all over the place. You'll find it on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails. smile.